Okay, welcome back to the channel. My name is Michael. In this video, we're going to be talking about the Utah Mammoth have matched the offer sheet for Barrett Hayton that the New Jersey Devils sent to him about a week ago. If you're not up to date, the New Jersey Devils did the rare thing and offer sheeted Barrett Hayton, something that doesn't really happen that often in the National Hockey League. And they signed him to a 1 year, 4 mil, $775,000 deal, which means that if Utah did not match, they would receive the New Jersey Devils' second round pick in 2027. Now, Utah did match that, and this sets both franchises in a little bit of a direction, I would say. Let's start with Utah. What does this do for Utah? Obviously, Utah had the money to do this. If you were thinking to yourself, why would Utah not do this? Which was a question of, you know, that is a legitimate question. If they have the money, why wouldn't they do this? But the reason why they wouldn't do it if they weren't to do it and to not match it would be because of the fact that when you match an offer that is of 1 year at 4.78 mil, you cannot trade this player. Barrett Hayton is untradeable until he becomes a free agent in a year from now, which he will become an unrestricted free agent. So, what does that mean for Utah? What does that mean for Barrett Hayton? Well, Utah made some upgrades this offseason. They added Anders Lee to a 3 year, $5.4 million. They also gave him a full no move clause for the first 2 years of the deal and a full no trade clause for the final year of the deal. He's 36. It's a very interesting contract, to say the least. And then they also traded for Vincent Trocheck, who they have him at 5.63 mil for the next 3 years, and he has a 10 team no trade clause that he received from the Rangers when he signed with them a few years ago. Um, Utah has improved their forward core. They also trade away JJ Peterka to the Boston Bruins at the draft. So they moved a player out, they moved a couple players in. So if you look at their lineup now, they have a pretty good lineup. Logan Cooley, Nick Schmaltz, Clayton Keller, Dylan Gunther, Vincent Trocheck, Anders Lee, Barrett Hayton, Lawson Krause, and Jack McBain. And then they also have guys like Kevin Stenlund, Brandon Tanev, Michael Carcone, Kailer Yamamoto, and Liam O'Brien, who are all under contract that are listed within the National Hockey League team. Barrett Hayton is a part of this team. He will slot in as their third line center behind Cooley or Schmaltz, whoever plays center on their first line, and Trocheck on the second line. This is a very good Utah team. They made the playoffs last year for the first time in their franchise history because Utah is not a part of the Arizona's franchise. They don't take that history. Um, but if you wanted to equate Utah and Arizona, the last time Arizona legitimately made the playoffs was 2012. They did make the playoffs during the COVID bubble, which was in 2020. Unfortunately, that was a little bit of an asterisk, I will say, in terms of making it. They beat Nashville in the play-in round and then lost in the second round, or in the first round, I think, to Vancouver. I don't think Arizona was on pace to even make the playoffs that year. Maybe they were. I could be wrong, but the last time they made a real playoffs was 2012. A lot of Utah slash Arizona fans haven't seen playoffs in 14 years, like legit playoffs. They get back to the playoffs this year, and they looked pretty good. They made the second round, and they improved their team. And I think that what Barrett Hayton is going to bring to them is really good two-way third line play. I think he's a very good third line center. Obviously, the Devils identified that. That's why they tried to trade for him at the 2026 draft, and then why they also offer sheeted him because they viewed him as a good player. But I think that Utah, matching the offer makes a lot of sense for Utah in terms of the sense of that he's a good player and he's a valuable player to the team in a third line role behind a very good top six, in my opinion, with Cooley, with Schmaltz, with Keller, with Gunther, Trocheck, Lee, Lawson Krause, arguably in that mix as well in terms of top six value. But this is a good team. They have a good forward core, they have a good D core, and Barrett Hayton just adds to that and can be a good penalty killer for them. And, they still have $4.5 million for the rest of the offseason. So if they wanted to go out and improve this team, they legitimately could. Their decor is Mikhail Sergachev, Mackenzie Weegar, John Marino, Nate Schmidt, Andrew Peak, Nick DeSimone, and Dmitry Simashev. So if they wanted to add a defenseman, they could. The goaltending, you could say, probably got an upgrade. They expect it to be better because they had Krell Vejmelka, who played a lot of games last year, and a goalie, a young goalie, not Sebastian, Sebastian Kosa, who they traded from Detroit. They gave up their first round pick, which was 23rd, 24th. So Barrett Hayton is a player who is going back to a good team that arguably got better this offseason and is expected to take another step. Maybe not to contender status, but to another level. Not just oh, we made the playoffs. We expect to now be players in our division and we expect to win rounds now, So I think that, Utah's a good team. And I think offers like matching the offer for Barrett Hayton was the smart move. Now, does Barrett Hayton stay a Utah Mammoth after this year? I don't know. This offer sheet handcuffs them in that sense because obviously they had a deal on the table to trade him and get value for him. They can't do that now. If they wanted to, they would have. If they wanted to trade him at any point this season, they can't. So it does handcuff them. That doesn't necessarily mean that Barrett Hayton will be a free agent next year. We could be in a situation where they have a deal in place and then July 1st they re-sign him. I'm not exactly sure how the RFA status works. I think they could still sign him to an extension prior to the contract expiring. But either way, this doesn't mean Barrett Hayton won't be a Utah Mammoth next offseason and sign somewhere else. But it definitely doesn't mean that Utah will be able to get value for him. If they don't view him as a part of their future plans, they can't trade him now. So they got handcuffed a little bit from New Jersey. Now, what does this mean for New Jersey? So, New Jersey obviously viewed this player as an asset on the third line. They obviously made a couple moves. They brought in Evan Rodriguez, who I expect to be a third line winger. They brought in Jesper Boqvist, who I fully expect to be a fourth line winger slash center. Um, but if they brought in Barrett Hayton, he would have been their third line center. Their center depth would have been Jack Hughes, Nico Hischier, Barrett Hayton, and Cody Glass. When I think of this move, I think about what are their plans now? Do they still view third line center as a major need? You could argue that it is a need. Now, I do like Cody Glass, to say that the least. I do like Cody Glass a lot. Um, he had a pretty good year this year, and I like his defensive game as well. But you can make the argument that he's not a true third line center. You could say that he could be a third line winger, maybe fourth line center. He's definitely not full-time fourth line center in terms of his talent, but is he a full-time third line center? That is definitely debatable, I think. But he did have a very good year this year. Now, does this mean that New Jersey's going to go out and try to get another third line center? Are they going to go out and maybe try to target like a Ryan O'Reilly? I don't know. But I do think that this does open up the possibility of potentially Dawson Mercer staying and being their third line center, or even Evan Rodriguez being their third line center. Now, personally, I wouldn't be a fan of Evan Rodriguez as their third line center because he's not very good at faceoffs. He's been under 50% the last 3 seasons when taking faceoffs, and he's taken a decent amount of faceoffs in that time. You know, I think that maybe they'll try to look to upgrade the third line center the rest of this off season. And if not, some point during the season. I mean, in terms of cap space right now, New Jersey still has $7.6 million and their deadline cap is 34.5 mil, a little over 34.5 mil. So let's say Nashville has a tough year and like I said, they want to move off assets. Ryan O'Reilly, who has 1 year left on his deal and will be a free agent next year, would be easily a deadline trade. And if Nashville's having a terrible season, could be a middle of the season trade. Sonny Meta said in his Zoom interview with the media that it's not about trying to find players to fill holes. It's about trying to get the best players available. And I think that partially both of those statements are true. In the sense of that you do need to get players to fill holes. If you don't have center depth, you can't just get a bunch of wingers and then expect one of them to be centers, especially at center. Um, but again, it's all about getting good players. I always was under the belief that acquiring Barrett Hayton, if they were to acquire Barrett Hayton and Utah not match it, that doesn't prevent them from getting a top six winger. But I do think that now this leads to the point where a top six winger might be now the number one priority. Now, as to who that first line winger will be, I'm not sure. There's a lot of names on the market. In terms of free agency, Anthony Mantha is still there. Patrick Kane is still there. Vladimir Tarasenko is still there. Personally, I would love a goal scorer in that first line role, and preferably someone who is better than Mantha, better than Kane, better than Tarasenko. Even though those are very good players, it's just they're not elite players, at least not anymore. Patrick Kane and Tarasenko definitely have taken a step back in terms of their overall status in terms of talent. Anthony Mantha came off of a very good season. I'm not sure if he can replicate a 30 plus goal, 60 plus season at the age of 34. I'm not sure if he can do that. But I do think New Jersey is going to look in the trade market and try to acquire a top six winger. They still might try to acquire a third line center. They definitely could. And now with Barrett Hayton not being on their team, it frees up more cap, if that makes sense. 7.6 mil, like I said. And I said in some previous videos, I could still see a possibility of Brendan Dillon or Jonas Siegenthaler being traded away. Maybe even Seamus Casey or Dawson Mercer. If let's just say, for instance, they keep Mercer on the team. They keep him as their third line center alongside Rodriguez and Connor Brown. There still is that first line winger hole. Maybe you do a situation where you trade away Brendan Dillon. If you were to trade away his $4 million, you would have 11.6 mil. And then let's say you go out and get Dylan Larkin, or maybe they do sign Mantha. Let's say they sign Mantha to like a 2 year, $5 or $6 million deal. They can financially do that. They can do that right now, actually, if they wanted to, financially speaking. What they could do is they could just have Mercer be 3C. They could trade for Dylan Larkin, trade away Brendan Dillon. Again, they could trade no one away. Imagine a scenario where their first line is Jack Hughes centering Jesper Bratt and Anthony Mantha. And then their second line is Nico Hischier centering Timo Meier and Arseny Griciuk. And then third line is Dawson Mercer centering Evan Rodriguez and Connor Brown. And then the fourth line is Cody Glass centering Jesper Boqvist and Stefan Nason. Maybe they think Cody Glass is a very good 3C and they have Glass as their 3C. And where does that put Mercer? I think that Barrett Hayton, if he was a New Jersey Devil, would solidify the bottom six officially as Rodriguez, Hayton, Brown, Boqvist, Glass, Nason, with Bjugstad and Haminaho in a situation of where will they be. And kind of leave Mercer in no man's land in terms because he's not good enough, in my opinion, to be a first line winger. But the roster's full in the bottom six. Now that he won't be a Devil, this leaves the possibility of Mercer staying on this team to start next year within the realm and still the ability of them to acquire a first line winger. It's going to be very interesting to see what they do because I think that there's more moves. I don't think that this was the only move that they were going to make, whether they got Hayton or not. But now that they don't have them, I think that gives them more freedom to go and get a big fish. I thought before if they got Hayton, it handicaps them a little bit financially in terms of the money that they have right now to do it, but they still have $7.6 million and they still have pieces they can trade away and they can still get that first line winger with the money they have. It's going to be difficult because 7.6 in terms of a trade, you know, who is out there that's less than 7.6 that is first line talent? Do you look at Tomas Hertl in Vegas? He's definitely taken a step back a little bit, but he's still a pretty decent goal scorer and he could be a good fit on the first line. Do you look at Dylan Larkin? You would only have to move out $1.1 million. You could easily do that with Bjugstad, who makes 1.7, I think. Let me take a look at his situation here. Bjugstad makes 1.75. If you wanted to move out Nick Bjugstad and bring in Dylan Larkin, you easily could. Does Dylan Larkin want to come to New Jersey? And then again, if Dylan Larkin does come to New Jersey, does Dylan Larkin play center and Jack Hughes move to wing? Because clearly you're not going to have a center depth of Jack Hughes, Dylan Larkin, Nico Hischier. That would be, in my opinion, the best center depth in the league, but you're not going to have Nico Hischier or Dylan Larkin play third line minutes. That's just not how it works. You would have to have Jack Hughes move to wing. But I know for some fans, they're going to be really happy that Barrett Hayton isn't a Devil. I know some fans are going to be disappointed that Barrett Hayton isn't a Devil. The facts are the facts. If he would have been a Devil, he would have made this team better, especially in the bottom six. And for fair value at 4.75 mil, he unfortunately is not. And now they have to pivot. Now they have to pivot and say, Who else are we going to go out and get? And what do we have to give up to get him? Because if this is the forward court, like I said, Bratt, Hughes, I don't know, Gritzuk, second line, Meyer, Heischer, Brown, third line, Rodriguez, Mercer, Nason, third line, Boqvist, Cody Glass, and Nick Bjugstad. Is that good enough? It's not. It's just not. You could even say Haminaho on the third line with Nason on the fourth line. It's just not a good enough forward core. And I think that Sonny Meta knows that. But I think we might see some moves, obviously, in the 7-day window of knowing if Utah was going to match the offer or not. I don't think that they would have made moves. I wasn't surprised that they didn't make or that they yeah, I wasn't surprised at all they didn't make moves. I fully expected them not to make any moves until they figured out what was going on with that. I think we might see some moves of them coming up because now they know what's going to happen with that. So it's going to be interesting. Tomorrow we're going to find out about Leo Carlson and see what that situation is. That's going to be crazy. I got to make a video on that. But that's all I got for this one. We'll see what the Devils do. Thanks so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, share with a friend. Maybe we'll share with another friend. Favorite if that's still a thing. And thanks for watching.